Hi, we're back with another episode of the Contralto Chronicle, and today I'm going to be discussing The Rape of Lucretia by Benjamin Britten. As with many of my other videos, I will cover historical context, premiere, themes in the opera, the music, and a little bit of the character that I portrayed in the last production I was in. This opera was written between January and June of 1946. The libretto was written by Robert Duncan and was based on a 1931 play, Le Viol, Le Lucretia by André Aubé, and in a broader sense, Shakespeare's epic poem. An interesting fact, or tidbit as I'll call them, Britten was sued by the French playwright for copyright infringement. He chose to settle the case out of court to not impede the speed of the production. Like King Arthur, this is based on a historical legend. They are real people and real places, but the facts of every version of the story are slightly different. The earliest recorded version of this play was in 8 BCE and was written in a book by Titius Livius, or his nickname Livy, and that book is Ab Urbe Conditia Libri. And that kind of covers the very basics of this opera. I guess I could say who the main characters are too. Lucretia is the main protagonist. Tarquinius is her rapist. Female and male chorus, who act as our Greek narrators. They have their own scenes, but they mostly will narrate parts of scenes before the characters begin their action. And it's kind of like a world within a world, a little bit of Inception going on there. And the basics of the story is that Lucretia was a noble woman who lived in 500 BCE, and she was married to Collatinus, a Roman officer, and was raped by Tarquinius, the Etruscan prince at the time. Now, let's dive into the historical context. This opera takes place during the Iron Age, which is pre-Roman Empire. We are in the Roman kingdom, and the Roman kingdom at this time was made up of city-states that were ruled by the Etruscans, which are a tribe of people, or were a tribe of people, from the Tuscany area of modern-day Italy. They ruled in the form of monarchies, but slightly different from the divine right monarchies that existed during most of Europe's age after this. These monarchs were elected by the people to serve for life. They had a senate of 300 members that acted as their council and legislative coordinators. The last king of the Roman Empire was Tarquinius Sextus, our bad guy in the opera. He gained power by killing his father-in-law. So he's a pretty good guy, as you can already tell. The main ways that people and empires or kingdoms raised money was through agriculture and warfare. Women were mostly at home. They were not allowed to be in public unless it was for social or religious purposes. They were, however, allowed to inherit property, which is novel for the time. The religious setting is a polytheistic setting, and they believed in omens and practiced harupacy, which is examining of animal sacrifices, their entrails, to divine future events. Now I'm going to cover a little bit of a synopsis. Collatinus was at the Roman military camp outside of Ardrea during the siege. This is the beginning of the opera. He, along with other young noblemen, debated the virtues of their wives. Collatinus asserted that his wife, Lucretia, was the most dedicated of wives. Tarquinius decided that to settle the bet, they would visit each other's wives by surprise to determine which wife was the most virtuous. Visit after visit, the men discovered that their wives were enjoying themselves, and yes, innuendo intended. But when they entered Collatinus's home, they found Lucretia weaving with her maids and mourning Collatinus's absence. Lucretia received the nobleman graciously. Tarquinius, the king's son at the time, he had not killed his father yet, noticed her beauty and virtue, which kindled in him the flame of desire. A few days later, Tarquinius returns while Collatinus is absent. Lucretia graciously is hospitable to him and gives him everything that is expected to be given to a king at this time. Gives him wine, asks him why he's there, what they can provide, a room to sleep in. Tarquinius waits until everyone is asleep. With a sword in hand, he goes to her bedroom. He wakes her and threatens to kill her if she utters a sound. He declares his love for her and implores her to give herself to him, not full of himself at all. If she accepts his sexual advances, she would become his wife and future queen of Rome. That sounds like a good deal, doesn't it? But she refuses, and he threatens to kill her and all of her servants, and will tell everyone that she was seen committing adultery with a slave. To spare her husband, Collatinus, the disgrace, Lucretia submits, and Tarquinius rapes her. Lucretia informs Collatinus of the rape later, and following that commits suicide. This next part of the story is not included in Britain's version of the opera, but I think it is of great historical importance and led to a very, very important turn in history. Lucretia's body was paraded through Rome after she committed suicide. It was also taken into the Roman Forum, not just through the streets, but actually into the building where laws were made and decided. There, Brutus / Junius recounted the king's abuses of power and the various grievances of the people. He was not a good leader, Tarquinius. He was tyrannical, and there were many, many issues that people had with him beyond his abhorrent behavior. Brutus pointed out that Tarquinius came to rule by murder of his father-in-law, excuse me, and Brutus convinced the partition families to abolish the monarchy and expel the Tarquins. This is how Rome became the Roman Republic and then the Roman Empire. They debated what form of government that Rome ought to have going forward. It was decided that a republican form of government with 2 councils executing the will of a partisan senate should replace the monarchy. Rome would be ruled by the laws and elected officials, by the Senate and the people of Rome. Senatus Populusque Romanus, the Senate and the people in Latin. And actually, Collatinus became one of those first council members in the new Roman Republic. Next, let's talk about the premiere. The premiere was given by the newly formed Glyndebourne English Opera Company. It lost tons of money, but led to the establishment of the English National Opera. It was revived, this production, The Rape of Lucretia, in 1966 with Dame Janet Baker, who was handpicked by Britain. At the time, all operas needed to be passed for public performance by Lord Chamberlain's office. The office commented that on one particular phrase, referring to Tarquinius's unsheathed sword, which became poised like a dart, be removed as it was little better than obscenities in Lady Chatterley's Lover, referring to another literature piece there. As with many of Britain's operas, Peter Pears appears in this opera. That's kind of a tongue twister. Peter Pears appears. He was the male chorus. This role was written for him, and Lucretia was written for the famous contralto Kathleen Ferrier. This is a chamber opera with 8 singers and 13 instruments. The premiere was also double cast because they had so many performances lined up. They didn't want to get anybody to be overburdened and become ill because they were doing performance after performance after performance. So I'm just going to read the cast of each thing. So I'll list cast A first for each part and then cast B. So male chorus was Peter Pears and Axel Schultz, which was he was a Swedish tenor of quite a bit of renown. Female chorus was Joan Cross and Flora Nielsen. Lucretia was Kathleen Ferrier and Nancy Evans. Tarquinius was Ottokar Kraus and Frank Rogier. Collatinus was Owen Brannigan and Norman Walker. Junius, Edmund Dunleavy and Frederick Sharp. Bianca was Anna Pollock and Catherine Lawson. Lucia was played by Margaret Ritchie and Leslie Duff. Now we're moving on to major themes in the opera. Some operas have very in-your-face themes, and some operas have themes that are more subtle. In my opinion, this opera has both. You have the very obvious themes, the outsider versus society, the virtuous victim. Then there are the themes that you may not notice as anything beyond the way the story was written. So the themes that we'll cover, obviously the overarching thing of this isolated individual versus society. We'll cover the sexual themes, gender dichotomy, frustrated passion, youth and innocent, and moral and religious overtones. The main themes of The Rape of Lucretia are the victimization and destruction of beauty and virtue by outside forces, more specifically, an oppressed society. Lucretia falls victim to the society that surrounds her, one of patriarchy and shame. Lucretia carries the burden of both innocence and shame, which can be kind of a paradox. Gender dichotomies are also central to Lucretia, but they are more subtle. The cast is evenly split between 4 males and 4 females. The action is split between the masculine world of the camp, the army camp, and the feminine world of spinning wheels and folding linen and garden activities, homely things. Let's talk a little bit more about this victimization of Lucretia. Lucretia is depicted in many paintings as a beautiful young woman. She is both beautiful and innocent. She spends most of her time at home worrying about Collatinus, as he is often out to war and she's not sure if he'll come home. She's never in her life been led astray by a desire or lust for another person. She has given her whole heart to her husband and spends every waking moment doting on him. And we see this outside world, this idea that women are to be confined and that anything that they do that can be considered adulterous would be not only a shame to them, but to their entire family. Whereas, if a man during this time were to be unfaithful, no one would think anything of it. I think, as with many periods in history, this has to do with the fact that women were a second-class citizen. They weren't property in this society, as with some other societies, but they didn't have many rights. I've laid out the gender dichotomies in a very simple form. In the two scenes that we really see the men and women separated, you have the first scene, the men are in the camp, they're drinking, they're talking about catching their wives being unfaithful or their own unfaithful activities. And then we have the women who are weaving, or they're folding linens, or they're gardening. And this really reinforces the social and societal norms of this time. And when these two worlds come together, we see this tension between them and how they interact. Another theme we have to talk about is youth and innocence. Lucretia is one representation of youth and innocence, and Lucia is the ultimate representation of youth and innocence. She's a very young maid in Lucretia's house, and she fantasizes about one day having the sort of love that Lucretia does. Whereas Bianca is the old maid, and she was Lucretia's wet nurse, and she has very fond memories of raising Lucretia, and often talks about being a mother to Lucretia. And you see on both sides, we have Junius, Tarquinius, and Collatinus. Collatinus is the oldest of them. Tarquinius is rather young, and him and Junius get into little quarrels. So you also have this youth and innocence versus age. You have these relationships throughout the opera. Frustrated passion. You have Lucretia's passion for her husband and the inner anxiety she has of Collatinus being gone and that frustration. And then there's this other side we have of Tarquinius and this desire to have someone who's so virtuous as of Lucretia. The final theme that we have to talk about is the morals and religion. So this is a time period and a society that is polytheistic. They believe in many gods. And an interesting thing is that the male and female chorus are Christians, and they talk about everything in terms of Christianity. And there's even this sort of overarching Christian overtone of Jesus and his sacrifice made, and how that's kind of applied to Lucretia, and how she, rather than living with the shame, she chose to spare everyone the pain that shame would bring upon the entire family, and take her own life, even though it is an unchristian thing to commit suicide. There's a comparison made. I'd like to read a quote that I found while researching the themes of this opera. Harper Scott: "It is, in any case, a grotesque male fantasy to suggest that a woman desires a rape, And even if on most days she desires Tarquinius, the point is that at this very moment she does not. Lucretia says, "No, never. I deny, you lie. I refuse, and please go." A total of 26 times before the rape. All but 4 of them in the first minute of her awakening. And these are merely the most obvious of her negative signals. It is an incoherent reading of an argue that she is complicit in her rape. As we discussed, Lucretia's rape led to the development of a Roman Republic because people did not think that one person should have so much power over anyone else. Even though women had very, very little power, they were still to be respected and listened to rather than treated as property or a tool of sexual desire. Next, we'll look at the music. Britain was influenced by many people. In this opera specific, we hear lots of influences of Purcell, Mahler, Stravinsky, Bartók, and Berg, especially in tonal nature. The opera has beautiful lyrical expression in simple modes, clean and clear orchestrations, and direct expression of natural speech rhythms versus lyrical stylization of poetry. It's beautiful the way that the music is set and this natural speech rhythm in particular. The music is complex in many ways. It's some of the most challenging music that I've ever worked on. And when you really feel and really embrace the music as it's written, the resulting effect is an amazing storytelling tool rather than things of important natures being compiled into ensembles or arias and not being able to necessarily understand the words in a clear way. It's raw and emotional, extremely expressive. There are a lot of musical themes throughout the opera, or leitmotifs if you want to call them that. We have Lucretia has her own theme, Tarquinius has her own theme. There's the weaving scene theme. There's Tarquinius's ride through the city. And they all are woven together with the libretto, and they don't leave any mystery, whereas sometimes other music can be rather ambiguous. Interludes between scenes are a compositional device which allow for scene changes and digestion of the plot. I think this is really genius because oftentimes composers repeat themes over and over again so that you get them. You have to usually hear something more than once to really comprehend it and understand it. And I think it was really smart for Britain to use these interludes and give audiences an audience member time to think about what they've just watched and observed before moving on to the next scene. This opera was also designed to be a chamber opera, as it was an opera for the people, opera for the masses. It traveled really, really well. The only part left for me to discuss is a little bit of my character in the opera. I do have a full video of my character analysis of Bianca, and I will link that in the description of this video. Please check it out. It is more than just me talking about my process of how I came to my character, Bianca. Bianca is, as I said, Lucretia's wet nurse, and her whole goal and the whole reason for her to be in this opera is to mentor Lucretia. She is there as a mother figure and wants to protect Lucretia from herself mostly, but also from the outside world. When we're introduced to Bianca, it's in the weaving scene, which is kind of this ethereal scene. You're watching the characters weaving on stage, but you're getting an internal thought from each character. And Bianca's inner thoughts are, even though she's old, she didn't have children of her own, but she really feels like Lucretia is her child. And it's a really beautiful scene. The other scenes where Bianca's in, every time she's interacting with either Lucia or with Lucretia, she is always mentoring them, giving them the best advice of how to be happy in their lives. Because even though Bianca's life didn't necessarily go the way that she wished it to, she's very content with the life that she's led, which I think is an important fact to discuss. And she really wants Lucretia to be happy and not worry so much about Colatinus. He always comes home. It's fine. Don't worry about him. He'll be home. Be happy in the life you have. Make something for yourself. You have to have your own happiness in order to love somebody else, is what Bianca, says to her. And that one of the lines she says is that to worry is to tempt, or to hope is to tempt disappointment, which is interesting. You get yourself so worked up about something, and then if it doesn't happen, you just feel crushed, which it can be an unhealthy train to get onto. That's not to say that a person shouldn't have ambitions, and even Bianca says that to Lucretia. That covers the first half of our discussion on the rape of Lucretia. Next time I will be back with a more in-depth discussion of the music that makes up the rape of Lucretia. I really felt like to do this justice, I needed to do a dedicated video to just the music of this. I hope you've enjoyed this content. If you like it, please subscribe and check out my Patreon, which will also be listed in the description of this video. Till next time.